Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 76 of The Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week is Daniel Jones. Jeremy Brown is... I don't really know what he's doing.
Something with Boy Scouts or...
Burning something down, becoming an arsonist. I'm not really sure what he's doing.
Yeah, I think he started those fires, right?
Doing something nefarious, rather than being on this fine, upstanding podcast. Yeah, welcome to the Best Games Period.
Thanks.
Each week we talk about a game that is really great and debate whether or not it deserves to be considered one of the best games, period. Kind of an unofficial video game You know what? I'm just going to say it's an official video game canon because it's officially our canon.
That's right. It's endorsed.
Right.
It's officially endorsed by the Best Games Period Council.
Yes, which is us.
Yep.
That is us. We are the final authority.
And I think our listeners and Patreon supporters especially are certainly like on that council. They're honorary members of the council.
That's true. That's very good point.
Yeah.
And to that end, we listen to all of the fine folks out there who listen to our show. There's a lot of mutual listening going on. And what did our listeners have to say about Infamous and Prince of Persia: Sands of Time? Because I don't think we did.
Yo, I was on vacation when both of those came out, so I don't think I put out a poll for either of them.
So I guess there's not a whole lot of mutual listening going on. Sorry about that. We'll
normally we do.
Yeah.
But I think, wait. Now,
maybe we
I think
can
I did one for Prince of Persia, but I don't know that I snapped a picture of it. Normally I take a picture.
Maybe we'll have like a poll stravaganza for next week. And we'll,
yeah, you know what? Yeah.
We'll run polls for all of them and then report back next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Swell idea, actually. Because pretty sure I don't have a picture of that Prince of Persia poll, but I do think we did a Prince of Persia poll. Although I think I really enjoy saying Prince of Persia poll.
So
Prince of Persia poll.
Try saying that 5 times fast.
I just did.
Okay, well, whatever.
Jack, how are you doing?
I am existing, I am thriving, I am around your house, hiding in the woodwork, in the secret rooms that were built by the original architect.
I know where all those secret rooms are, and you're right next to me because I'm sitting right by one of them. So this is weird.
I mean, it's awkward, but I mean, you get used to it eventually.
It's dark in there, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but I have little hide holes I can peek out of and see you walking around and
those are called glory holes, Jack.
Because of the glorious visions I see through the holes, yeah.
Yes.
How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm refreshed, back from vacation in Cape Cod.
Nice.
Didn't get eaten by a shark.
That sounds fancy. Not the getting eaten by a shark part. The vacationing in Cape Cod part.
I mean, not fancy. You're not from New England.
Everybody
vacations
fancy
in Cape Cod, and it's not fancy. It's there's a vampire weekend all about how Cape Cod's a shithole.
That's because it has vampires there, Daniel. Of course, it's not going to be great.
No, I like Cape Cod. It was nice, and we had this cottage. It wasn't a cottage. It was really a little house in the woods.
Isn't that what a cottage is?
Well, yeah, I guess so. But it was like it was nice. Like, I've stayed in cottages. This was not rustic really at all. It just happened to be in the woods.
So it wasn't a cottage, but it was a cottage.
Sure, there you go. It had central air, had 2 full bathrooms. We had our own bathroom in our room. Quinn slept with Coley's mom, so that was great. All week, like nice. in the same room with her. And one night we went swimming. Like, Quinn and I went swimming in the afternoon, and then it wasn't actually in the nighttime. It was early evening, and Coley and I were going to be going on a date for date night, and we went on date night, and it was very nice. But before that happened, I needed to clean up, and I had given Quinn a bath because it was bath night, and I was like, like they had this big jacuzzi tub. Yeah. And I don't fit in tubs. And I like to take baths. I like hot tubs and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I never get to use them, right?
Uh-huh.
So my daughter was taking this bath, and I was super jealous. So when she got out of the bath, I needed to get ready for our date. So I decided to run myself a bath. And I used the suds from her soap. And holy cow, they bubbled up when I turned the jets on. I almost had bubbles overflowing out of the tub. But it was fantastic. It was a very pleasant experience taking a big bath in a tub.
Baths are so nice.
I know. It was nice. I sat in there for about 15 minutes. Although, no, like, you set a timer. I set a timer for these jets. Mm-hmm. And Coley came in and checked on me at one point. And she's like, how you doing? Everybody was kind of weirded out by it. Quinn was like, why is Daddy taking a bath? Because I never take a bath. We have a bathtub, but it is not big enough for me to take a bath. And so, anyway, so I was sitting in there, I was taking my bath, and Coley comes in and checks, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready to get out of this pretty soon. Can you set the timer down to 5 minutes? So she put it down to 5 minutes, but it was definitely longer than 5 minutes. So like, I called her back in. I was like, I need to turn these jets off. This is the longest 5 minutes of my life. So after a certain point, I just couldn't handle it. I couldn't relax enough for this bath. It would have been much nicer if I was fully relaxed and prepared for it. But
so you got into a fight with the bathtub, and the bathtub won.
Well, the jets were intense, and it was too long.
The bath was just too strong.
The timer was not going down. I kept watching it, and it was not moving at all, so 5 minutes seemed like an hour. And we had to go on a date, and we went on a date, and I went to this place that Guy Fieri had gone to. It was actually really delicious.
Well, good.
I had lobster, baked lobster pie in like this cornbread stuffing, and oh my gosh, it was really yummy. And we ate it on a pier. Wow. In the Sound.
Did they catch the lobster right in front of you?
No, but you can imagine most of those places, the lobsters, they did say on their menu, like, they actually said specifically the date that, like, the lobsters were caught, which was the day prior.
Oh, wow.
When we ate. So.
Do you want to know a fun lobster fact?
I so totally do.
Apparently, lobsters used to be considered food for poor people.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, they used to be.
Well, because they had, like, back in the day, they had the same thoughts about lobsters that I have about lobsters, which are...
That they're gross?
They're gross sea bugs. Why would you eat them if you can at all avoid it? And so they would give, like, lobster dinners to, like, widows and orphans. Like, that's what widows and orphans would eat. And then tourists started coming to, like, seaside towns, and... like the people who lived there were like, yeah, let's just sell the tourists these crappy sea bugs, and people realized that I guess they taste pretty good, and so that it suddenly, instead of being a food for poor people, it became a food for fancy people. Yeah.
You want to know another fun fact about lobsters?
I would love another fun lobster fact. That's what this show is about now.
Yeah, this is Lobster Hour with Jack and Daniel.
Lobster Hour, it's really the best. Lobster Hour can bring a festive gas. Sea bugs, sea bugs, sea bugs, will you not have a gay old time? Lobster Hour, it's really the best. Lobster Hour can bring a festive gas. Sea bugs, sea bugs, sea bugs, will you not have a gay old time?
They only, I I don't know. This could totally not be true. They are monogamous.
Really?
They're monogamous.
I didn't know bugs practiced monogamy.
They're not bugs. They're crustaceans. They mate with the same lobster for their entire life.
Different name. They're basically bugs of the sea. We all know it.
They're not bugs of the sea. They're delicious bugs of the sea. Delicious.
I'm not saying they don't taste good. I'm just saying that they are bugs. They are sea bugs. That is what they are.
Well, they're big enough to have delicious meat inside their shells.
Hey, I'm sure some bugs are big enough to have delicious meat inside their shells too, but
I'm
not going to eat them.
They're not bugs. Bugs have exoskeletons. They don't have exoskeletons. They have shells. It's different.
Isn't that the same thing?
Shh. No, because you call them shells, not exoskeletons. See? So it's different. This episode's going to be about Super Meat Boy.
Is it? Wait, I thought it was Lobster Fact Hour.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. More lobster, please. This week we're talking about Super Meat Boy from Team Meat, which consists of Edmund McMillen and Tommy McElland?
Isn't it Tommy Refenes?
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 I don't know how to say his name.
Tommy Refenes. I think it's Refenes. Refines. Prince of Persia Pole.
Yes, Prince of Persia Pole. I guess I got that confused because the reason I get the people who made this game confused is because I played this game back in 2008 when it originally released as a Flash game.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, so...
Well, I knew that it was a Flash game. I didn't know that's when you played it.
Yeah, so I actually remember playing... And it was just released as Meat Boy online. Right. And it ended up being this wildly popular Flash game. And to kind of give a little bit more context, back in 2008, downloadable games were just kind of becoming a thing.
Yeah.
Like, the indie market did not exist, and that's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
Jonathan Blow hadn't graced us with them yet.
Yeah, that was 2009.
Yep.
I believe. But essentially, like... that was the time when instead of making an indie game that you would then sell on Steam, because the Steam store wasn't really like it was today, where pretty much anything can get on it, and consoles were right out of the picture if you weren't like a rather large developer already. Instead, aspiring developers or just kind of indie or experimental developers would release stuff as Flash games. Like, they would release it for free on a place like Newgrounds or through various online publishers. I think Congregate eventually kind of became one, and Armor Games was a big one.
Yep.
And Armor Games, I believe, is the company that published the original Meat Boy. And they put it out to the world, and it ended up getting like 8 million plays or something like that. It's a crazy big number, especially for 2008 when internet was a little bit more closed off, a little bit more wild.
Yeah, like Napster still kind of existed.
MySpace was a thing.
Yes.
So, and in that original Flash game, you had a lot of the elements that would make it into Super Meat Boy. You had you didn't have the level recap, where in Super Meat Boy, one of the defining features is that you would go through the level, and then once you finally made it to the end, it would replay all of your attempts to finish the level at one time. So you could see all of your past deaths going through the level. It didn't have that, but it had a lot of the same design conceits and a lot of the same mechanics that you would see in the future commercial indie release. And I just find it really interesting how they managed to have, even in 2008, before it made it huge, they had such a solid vision for what the game would be.
Yeah.
The prototype for Super Meat Boy, this Meat Boy game, like, the mechanics aren't quite as solid.
Right.
They're a little bit laggy, and that could be because it's a Flash game online, but a little bit laggy, a little bit floaty, whereas the finished Super Meat Boy is very much precision. Like, you play that game and you feel like you're in total control pretty much all the time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And you know, because it was a Flash game first, and a lot of those levels were built long before it came out on 360, they had time, especially after they struck the deal with Microsoft, because Microsoft did give them some financial backing to release it on 360.
And Nintendo.
And Nintendo did as well, yeah. But once they did that, they had time to basically just refine, and that's exactly what I said Slime Song was missing, was just refinement, and that is the difference, because Meat Boy is incredibly refined, Super Meat Boy.
I mean, that process almost killed them, really.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, just a little editor's note. If you hear a few sudden cuts or inconsistencies or something that seems a little bit off, that's because we were having some technical difficulties throughout this episode that required us to kind of record in segments, and it for the most part, it works. So we ran into a snag, we overcame it, and we wanted you to have an episode. So that's what kind of is the funny business going on there. And I also just wanted to issue a little bit of a correction, which is not something I usually do. But since I'm making this note anyway, might as well do that. When I was having trouble remembering the name Jonathan McEntee, that's because Jonathan worked on the original Meat Boy with Edmund McMillen. However, he did not work on Super Meat Boy, which was Edmund McMillen and Tommy Refenes. Refines. I'm just gonna say Tommy Refines. I'm so sorry, Tommy, if you listen to this. I'm so sorry. This is actually the second time I've had to record this because we lost the entire editing version of this episode. So, still getting your name wrong. I apologize. Anyway, here we go. It took them, several years to make the finished version of Super Meat Boy. So they had the prototype, and actually people even included a level editor with the Flash game, the original Meat Boy. And so people would make their own levels using the tools in that level editor, which was kind of neat. And I think some of those might have even made it into Super Meat Boy. Don't quote me on that, because I'm not 100% on that, but I think that might have been the case.
Okay.
Or at least maybe it was planned to be the case. So, what is Super Meat Boy? Super Meat Boy is basically this platformer about a sentient piece of meat and his Band-Aid girlfriend, who has Bandage Girl, who has been abducted by the evil Dr. Fetus, who is a little fetus with monocle and a glass jar, and as Super Meat Boy, you're on a quest to get her back. And in order to do that, all you can do is really run and jump, and using those two abilities, you kind of make your way through a increasingly difficult obstacle course levels that are filled with dangers like salt and fire and whirly blades, all kinds of things. And for each level, it's one of those games that doesn't make death a punishment. Like, you're never punished for dying, except that you start back at the beginning of the level. And
which the levels aren't super long.
Yeah,
it's almost, most of them are like one screen.
Yeah,
almost.
they're very self-contained.
Yeah.
And so every time you beat a level, it then kind of replays all of your deaths as you attempted to make it through that level all the previous times. And so it's kind of this nice little reward ego boost of like, yes, I finally did it. And it's just kind of the pure essence of platforming. Like there aren't power-ups as far as I remember. There are secrets that you can find, but there aren't. It's not like a Super Mario game. It's much more focused on the pure thrill of just platforming. And that's not something you see a ton of games focusing on and doing well, but Super Meat Boy really managed to kind of nail it down.
At least it wasn't a thing that you saw a ton of games doing at that time.
No. And I
think
mean,
Super Meat Boy has influenced a lot the platformer genre in a huge way, and that we see those kind of games a lot more now.
Well, yeah, and that kind of ties in, though, with not a lot of games had the opportunity to do that back when Super Meat Boy came out. Like,
right.
It was kind of part of that first indie vanguard. And one of these days we'll have to talk about Castle Crashers, because that Castle Crashers and Braid are really kind of the two that started it all. But Super Meat Boy...
You might even say that Braid came out before Castle Crashers.
Did it?
Anybody who says that Braid came out after Castle Crashers is completely wrong.
Is that a callback to something I said?
It's a callback to my own mistake, because I at one time said I think in the Braid episode or some other episode, maybe it might have been on the Jacked Up Indian Mojo show, but I think I said that Braid was less influential than Castle Crashers because Castle Crashers came first, but that's pretty sure we corrected that Castle Crashers came out a few months after. Anyway,
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time you were wrong on the show, so unlike me,
won't be the last either. No, you're never wrong. Never. Nope.
So what, like, a large part of it is that kind of up until this point, if you looked at Flash games that were even Flash games in the proto indie environment that was, early mid 2000s internet development, like, there weren't a ton of platforming games, at least not a ton that were kind of their own self-contained thing. Like, you had a lot of Super Mario Brothers clones, you had a lot of things kind of pretending to be other games, like fan tributes to Mega Man or Metroid and stuff like that.
Had Super Gianna Sisters come out? Gianna Sisters come out yet? At that point, I don't know.
We'll have to. I think we might even have to do an episode on Super Gianna Sisters at some point, just because it has such a weird history. Because I think there were a couple Super Gianna Sisters that had come out like prior to that. It wasn't like an online thing. It's only recently that they've been coming out on PC more and more.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with some of the licensing issues. But I don't think back in like 2008 they were a thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's been a little bit more recently.
All right.
And by they weren't a thing, before you internet commenters get on me, I mean they were a thing, they just didn't really experience their resurgence until, a few years later when Steam was more established and widespread. But yeah, what exactly makes Super Meat Boy so beloved? Because this game, with almost no advertising help, essentially kicked off the modern indie movement, along with a handful of other titles like Braid, Castle Crashers, etc. The ones we were just talking about.
They allude to this. Well, they more than allude to it, but they talk about this in Indie Game the Movie, which we haven't really talked about, but Indie Game the Movie was a documentary that, have we talked? I mean, we've mentioned it on this show.
Well, we did an episode. We did a Patreon. We did a Patreon episode on Indie Game the Movie. But for people who don't, throw us $1 per month on Patreon.
Patreon.com/bestgames, period.
Go on.
Why are you laughing?
Because I was waiting for you to continue.
They kind of mentioned this in Indie Game the Movie, but one of the things that I think helped Super Meat Boy gain traction was that it came out right at a time when video was becoming a much more popular way for people to find out about video games. YouTube and streaming were really becoming more of a thing.
Because, I mean, YouTube was relatively new at the time.
But Let's Plays had begun to pop up online, and Super Meat Boy being so challenging was kind of part of that wave of games that still is kind of going on.
Because people want to show off.
Yeah, they want to show when they're really good at a hard game, or they just want to show a really hard game, and people enjoy watching them fail. It's entertaining. And in Indie Game the Movie, they show like clips of YouTubers playing it. Which, by the way, Indie Game the Movie is a documentary on a few different indie games in development. It follows their development, and it followed Team Meat as they created Super Meat Boy. And there was a scene where they saw the Meat Boy creators were watching like the Giant Bomb guys play Super Meat Boy, and Giant Bomb is very influential, but they weren't the only people streaming and let's playing Super Meat Boy. It kind of blew up in that way, so I think that was definitely a big part of why it succeeded. And I mean, you could say that about a lot of different indie games. The two things kind of rose to prominence at the same time, hand in hand.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think it can be overstated how useful internet video has been to get lesser-known games free advertising and word of mouth and buzz. I don't want to open the whole can of worms of, Let's Plays as free advertising and companies kind of cracking down on Let's Plays to try and get their revenue. Don't want to open that can of worms. Suffice it to say, I think just let people share what they like or dislike about your game, because it's getting your work out to more people either way. So anyway, Super Meat Boy did a lot of that, but it also is, I think, does not get enough credit for how good it looks. It's a very good looking game, and I think that is part of its appeal as well, because it has a very unique aesthetic. Edmund McMillen games have a very unique look to them, whether it's Super Meat Boy or Binding of Isaac. You can look at a game and immediately know that Edmund McMillen worked on it.
Binding of Isaac is cool looking in its own way, but Super Meat Boy had a more kind of universal appeal. It was definitely more approachable.
Yes, and I do think that The Binding of Isaac is a game we should talk about on here at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that game is still being remade. Came out on 360, and it has come out on so many different systems. It's coming out on it came out on Switch now too. It's spanned 3 generations of consoles. So I think there's definitely a lot to talk about there. But when it comes to Super Meat Boy in particular, it's not like one of the games that we've talked about that deals with particularly weighty issues or
No.
requires people to do a lot of soul searching. But I think that it has a lot of heart. Like, it's a genuine game. Like, the story that's there is, like, surprisingly effective. Like, the intro to Super Meat Boy is just kind of like in the style of a silent film. It's like, this is Super Meat Boy. This is Bandage Girl. They love each other. And this is Dr. Fetus. No one loves Dr. Fetus. He looks sad, and then, so he hates everyone, and then he just flips the bird to the audience. Like, it's so charming and cutely done, and the very obvious metaphor of this raw meat person needing a Band-Aid person to complete them is very cute, and
Yep.
I think, like, speaks to how a lot of people fit together. They're different brokenness kind of complements each other and works
Yep.
to fix or help the other person.
And I mean, like, there is no shortage of Super Meat Boy paraphernalia around. Like, he's a little iconic character of his own now at this point, and like, you can buy Meat Boy plushies and T-shirts, and you walk around any PAX, and I guarantee you will see people
and it's
with
interesting
Meat
because
Boy apparel.
even though the character is implied to be kind of this raw, like, painful piece of meat, the kind of character that needs bandages all over,
Yeah.
he's a very happy-go-lucky seeming character. Like, he's always smiling or, like, giving a thumbs up, or sometimes he's yelling as he gets sucked into a portal or something, but for the most part, like, a super upbeat character. And so I think a lot of people bond with that characterization of him. And I find that interesting because design-wise, he's basically a block with blocky arms and legs and just a very expressive mouth. Like, it's not like it's a super remarkable design, but the way the game characterizes him and the, surprisingly endearing things that he does and is able to do within the constraints of his silly-looking body, really gets people to kind of root for him and want him as plushies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it, like, kind of like Sackboy, I guess, except I would argue that Meat Boy is the superior of the two, between Meat Boy and Sackboy.
I mean, I'd say Super Meat Boy is a better platformer than Little Big Planet. I'm partial to Sackboy personally, but I get it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, now we're living kind of in an age where there are tons of platformers, and I don't think that there has been a 2D side-scrolling platformer that comes close to rivaling Super Meat Boy since it released. The only one I could think of a pretty good argument for is maybe Shovel Knight as a platforming game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't consider Shovel Knight to be a platformer. I really consider that to be a different genre. Yeah, I do. Everybody always refers to Shovel Knight as a platformer. I never considered, like, the DuckTales games to be platformers, or, like, Castlevania games to be platformers. Like, there is some platforming in there, sure, but those are action games to me. They were just 2D. So, I don't know.
Is Mario an action game to you?
No,
then
Mario's
what's
a
the
platformer.
difference?
There's a big difference. Like, the majority of your time in Mario is jumping and avoiding things. The majority of your time in Shovel Knight is fighting things.
But jumping is your way to fight things in Mario. It's
but that's
Shovel Knight. You jump on things with your shovel, right?
No. Yeah, but no. Because Mario, the enemies are an obstacle that you have to avoid. You don't always have to
yes, you
jump
do.
on them.
You have to kill them all.
You are
kill them all, Daniel.
You are avoiding them. Like Super Meat Boy has some little enemies once in a while, or some bosses, but they are basically just pattern recognition obstacles to get past. Which this is a debate for another time. I don't consider those to be. I don't consider Shovel Knight to be in the same genre.
I do find it interesting that the upcoming sequel to Super Meat Boy, Super Meat Boy Forever, that appears to have combat in it.
Oh,
which it's an interesting way to take things. In the trailer, he's like punching, and it's much more of a side scroller than it is a kind of self-contained levels that you've been used to. Yeah. You can see him in the trailer, like punching a flying enemy creature.
I'll have to watch
that.
I don't think I've ever watched it.
Yeah, it's not like a super in-depth trailer or anything, but you get the idea. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where they take Super Meat Boy going forward into the next iteration. That being said,
we should talk a little bit more about Super Meat Boy and what makes its platforming so good.
Okay. I was going to ask you what it doesn't do so well, because I feel like we've been talking a lot about its positives. Does it have negatives?
All right, so one thing I do want to say just about its positives is that Super Meat Boy of all the games I've played, it's one of the best games at teaching the player the mechanics without making them bored, without making them feel like they're being taught the mechanics. Because there's actually there's a bit of a learning curve to Super Meat Boy. There's things that you need to understand and rules and the language to the game that you need to know. And it teaches you those throughout the first world, really. And it does that so freaking effectively. Like, just every level introduces some new... Like, the very first level is just jump across this thing. And then the second level is jump across this larger thing. Yeah. Chasm. And it just progresses like that. And each level introduces some new obstacle. And it's just a textbook in how to do
how to make a tutorial, not a tutorial. Well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can go back to Mario and see how to do that as well. But I would argue that Meat Boy does it even better.
Well, Meat Boy does have the advantage of, being able to put text and, like, explain you're supposed to do this, whereas Mario probably didn't have the space to do it on the cartridge at the time.
That's a good point.
But, yeah, like, that being said, it's a very smooth transition into being able to just play the game. There's no, like, this is a tutorial, you idiot.
Yeah.
It doesn't play... It plays around with kid gloves for the first world and then kind of opens up to being more difficult as you go along.
So then what does Super Meat Boy not do super well, Jack? I'm trying to think of something.
Yeah, it's... that's one of the things. I consider... And this is something I actually mentioned in the honorable mention that came out this week.
Call of Juarez Gunslinger?
Yeah, I consider Super Meat Boy to be... Whereas Call of Juarez Gunslinger is very much a genre Western game. Like, it's a genre piece.
Yep.
And I comment about that in the honorable mention. Super Meat Boy is very much a genre piece for platforming. Like, it doesn't have a whole lot more going for it other than the platforming I mean, obviously there are other pluses there, but the main focus of the game is on providing this crisp platforming experience, and it does that so well. Like, it fires on all cylinders for that.
Yep.
And it has a bunch of different secrets to uncover. You can play as different characters to mix things up. You can, play dark world levels. You can go just through the main story. Like, it has all these different things that add more replayability to it. You can either just try and save the bandage girl, or you can just be like, hey, I'm gonna not only save Bandage Girl, but I'm also gonna collect all the bandages that are hidden throughout all these levels. And doing that is really difficult, but it adds that little extra goal, that little extra spice that kind of keeps things interesting. If I had to say, maybe one thing that this game could count against this game. And it's something that I find to be a really interesting question when I'm playing games and looking and reviewing them and trying to think about them critically. Is it possible for Super Meat Boy to be too hard? And that's something I ask myself about a lot of games, and I find it to be a really interesting question because, on the one hand, I think it's fine for a game to be difficult, and it's fine to struggle to complete a game. But on the other hand, maybe that's also a strike against it if someone can't finish a game. Like, maybe there needs to be other accessibility modes so that someone who maybe you're getting older and you don't have the best reflexes anymore, maybe someone like that still wants to finish Super Meat Boy, Yep. And so maybe there's a case to be made there. Or maybe someone has a disability and they can't press the buttons fast enough. Do they not deserve to see the end of Super Meat Boy? And, don't take that as me just picking on Super Meat Boy. That's a wider question I have for a lot of different games that I play. If when I'm 80 years old, am I still going to enjoy Super Mario World as much as when I'm, when I was growing up? I would like to hope that I would still be able to finish Super Mario World when I'm that old, but I have no idea what my reflexes are going to be, And does that mean that I, as a player, am at fault for not being good enough to finish that game? Or is it the game's fault for not being able to have an option to meet me wherever my skill level is?
God, you could ask that about many games.
Right, and so it's not just a question about Super Meat Boy. I hope I'm not making it seem like I'm picking on Super Meat Boy, like, oh, you need to be easier, Super Meat Boy. But I do think when you encounter a game that is difficult like this, at what point is it too difficult? Should there be an option? Should there be an obligation to meet players who are less skilled or less able to finish the game? And I don't really have a clear answer on that. I just find it to be a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And something that, again, might be a knock against Super Meat Boy if the game has an obligation to kind of meet a player where they are. And I don't have a clean answer for that, so I'm just kind of bringing that up.
Yeah, I think that I am terrible at Super Meat Boy. I'm very bad at this game. I think I probably got through, 70 or so levels. Mm-hmm. And that's about where I plateaued. And at a certain point when I play that game, and I've tried to progress, I've tried to replay and start from the beginning and go through, and at a certain point when I'm playing that game, I just kind of stop and think, why am I doing this? Because really, and I'm only saying this because I recognize that Meat Boy is a super great game. It's a very fine example of what platformers do well. We've talked about that this whole episode, but when I think about it, I don't necessarily play platformers just for the challenge of the platforming. I think that is one of the main reasons that I do. I think it's, I've talked about that in our Donkey Kong Country episodes and whatnot, but there's obviously more to it, and that appeals to people about platformers. I mean, I actually would say that personally, my favorite platformer of the last, generation or so, whenever it came out, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, is Rayman Legends, and Origins, but Legends basically includes all of Origins, and a lot of the levels are even better than the Origins levels. So, I'm a big fan of those games, but those are more classical type platformers like Mario, Donkey Kong Country style games than they are like just strictly about the challenge. And they provide a little bit more. There's more incentive to keep going. I guess that's the thing. Like when I'm playing Meat Boy, the incentive to keep going is to simply challenge yourself. It's to challenge yourself to do better. And there's virtue in that, for sure. But when I actually just want to sit down and enjoy a game, challenging myself to get better at it is not always what I want to be doing in a game. And that's definitely a weird trait of my own characteristics as a gamer.
I don't feel like that's something unique to you. I feel like that applies to a lot of people.
I think it does too, but there is this stigma that, like, if you're a gamer, you need to try to be, like, really good at games, and you need to play challenging games, and that's what games are about. And when I play Bloodborne, I freaking love Bloodborne, but I got to a point in Bloodborne that I was just not having fun, and I was just banging my head against the wall and decided to put it down. And I mean, like Breath of the Wild right now, I've been playing that. I played that a bunch over vacation, and just that game's really challenging, and I don't have the motivation to learn everything that game wants me to learn and explore everywhere that game wants me to explore. There are things that game does that I love and really appreciate, but I don't have the patience for some of its combat and challenges that it presents to the player, and just like so anyway, I'm rambling, but
yeah,
it's
like hard the thing about down.
the thing about Super Meat Boy is that it's all about that challenge, and it doesn't really offer anything else. It's not trying to. So I don't know if that's a flaw. I think that's exactly what they were going for. But there's a reason that Mario World has sort of a puzzle element to it, and the levels are colorfully designed. There's a reason Super Mario 64 is so well revered, and so much of it is just exploring and exploration, because variety is kind of the spice of life in a lot of ways for a lot of gamers, and me included. So I don't know. So
is your point that Super Meat Boy doesn't necessarily have as much other stuff variety to do?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah, it is just every level is a new platforming challenge, and most of them present new challenges, new elements, and new ways for your thumbs to twist and to knots. But that's it.
So as opposed to like Super Mario World, where you have power-ups and a variety of different enemies that you need to strategize around, and different items to jump on and whatnot.
There is a rhythm to those games that they control the pacing very rigidly, in that they want you to have a level where you feel like you can breathe, and then they ramp it up and have a super difficult level. And Meat Boy
is going
just
kind of at 100.
Yeah, it's just always at 11. Yeah. So
and not that
I get exhausted playing that game. I love it and I respect it, but it is exhausting.
And yeah, it's I find it difficult to kind of pin down games that do just go hard into their premise, because on the one hand, I really, like you were saying, I really respect it. I really enjoy that kind of stuff. And on the other hand, I do think you're right. There's always some room for something to branch out and kind of maybe embrace a few additional elements that might add a little spice to the proceedings. But I don't think that either of the questions we've kind of brought up really make Meat Boy suffer all that much. Like,
no.
And that goes back to what I was saying. Like, it's very much a genre piece about platforming. And it does away with a lot of those extraneous spices and just focuses on getting the bread and butter right. And you know what? For some games and some meals, sometimes bread and butter is really good. You ever, those really great, like, cheese rolls at, like, a Chinese place? Those are great.
It's got cheese in it.
No. They're called cheese rolls, but they're not cheesy. They're like bread rolls.
Well, then I do not know what you're talking about.
Well, you should, because they are delicious.
Sometimes you go out to dinner and they give you those warm rolls with the butter before the meal, and that's yeah, those are delicious. But it's also because you've been starving, because you don't decide to go out to dinner until you're already hungry, and then by the time you drive there, and then by the time they bring the rolls, it's been like 30 minutes from the point where you realized you were hungry, so now you're just starving.
Exactly.
So the rolls just taste like the most amazing thing ever. And that's what Meat Boy is.
The most amazing roll ever. But I guess, like, there's a difference between just, like, a sad slice of bread with, like, a cold patty of butter on it, and, like, a super really good, well-made loaf of bread fresh out of the oven with, like, some high-quality butter. And Super Meat Boy is just, like, really good at what it does, and it doesn't need to be more than that. For all the questions we just brought up, I don't think that it suffers, really.
Right. I think it's just, I was just explaining why it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
But it's in one of those cases where I don't think that makes it a bad game at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It's like you can criticize something and still respect it and like it. I didn't know you could do that. That's crazy.
The internet. Nope. Can't do that.
So obviously you think it's like the worst thing that has ever been created, right?
It is absolutely a best game, period, and I hate it so much. No, I really like Super Meat Boy, and I would definitely say that it's a best game, period. I just, it's not my favorite it's not my favorite game, but I respect the heck out of it. And every once in a while, I might go back and play a few levels just because they are really fun.
Yeah.
What about you, Jack? What do you think?
I mean, I don't think there's any world in which Super Meat Boy doesn't belong on as one of the best games, period. Like, it's done so much for indie games, it's done so much for platforming games, because I think it's hard to overstate the state of the industry back in 2010. Like, platforming games were not popular. Like, it was first-person shooters, man. It's still first-person shooters. But the kind of the indie renaissance, kind of headed by Super Meat Boy and Braid, really kind of brought back that genre. Showed that there was this groundswell of support for it outside of the old timers like Super Mario Brothers. So, yeah, it's just important to gaming history in general, and it totally holds up. It's going to be one of those games that 20 years from now is still going to be fun to play. And it has that, back before pixel art was kind of the main thing, it has kind of a more cartoony art style that is certainly unique. Like I was saying, you definitely know you're playing an Edmund McMillen game.
Yep.
And that's going to age really well as well. And also, we didn't really mention this, but Danny Baranowski is the composer. He did the music for Super Meat Boy, and also Meat Boy, the normal Meat Boy. And that, Danny Baranowski does some really great musical work. He also did Crypt of the Necrodancer. That's kind of the most recent thing he's put out, and it's fantastic. Go play Crypt of the Necrodancer. It's a great little music roguelike dungeon crawler mixed with DDR. It's great. So
I haven't played it, but I definitely want to.
I mean, even if you haven't played Crypt of the Necrodancer, just download the soundtrack, because it's definitely worth listening to.
All right. And the soundtrack of Meat Boy is excellent. You can find it most places online.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can even buy some of the tracks on Rock Band 3 if you still do that.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Probably.
Yeah, some of the tracks are on Rock Band 3, but I don't know that store is still available.
I believe it is, but...
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool dizzle. All right. Well, that was a good episode, Jack.
I mean, we had some technical difficulties, but it'll sound great
the
in
listeners
post.
Don't notice that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Jack,
Daniel,
Jeremy,
Daniel.
That was pretty good. Thank you for joining me tonight for this episode of the Best Games Period, episode 76. And thank you, good listeners, for joining us for another raucous, wild, fun episode of the Best Games Period. Jack, can you start to take us out by telling us all about Extra Life?
Sure thing. Extra Life is a fantastic charity. Basically, it's part of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, and you help kids by playing games. What? Yeah, it's like the best thing ever. You can learn more over on extra-life.org, where if you choose to sign up, you can actually choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital you want to support, and 100% of all the money that you raise goes directly to that hospital to help sick and injured kids. Nothing is skimmed off the top. It's wonderful. Perfect. So if you want to help kids and also play games at the same time, check Extra Life out. I believe the day that a lot of people are going to be playing games for prolonged periods of time is coming up on November 4th. So be sure to sign up before then. And hey, maybe raise a few bucks too. It's for the kids.
Yeah. And you can always find this episode and all our other episodes on community.extra-life.org. They go up every Monday. They also go on GameInformer.com, Facebook.com/bestgamesperiod, Twitter.com @bestgamesperiod, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Libsyn, our hosting site. You can also find the episodes on Patreon.com/bestgamesperiod, where you can support us with $1 or more per month, and you get extra bonus content. We did some stuff recently that I thought was pretty fun. Jack and I did a spoiler review of Rime. The first half of it is not spoilers, but we really liked the game Rime, and we ended up having a pretty lengthy discussion all about it in depth. So if you want to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. What else, Jack? What am I missing?
There will be, I believe by the time this goes up, if I am motivated enough, we should have an edited episode on Patreon about this 1986 Super Mario Brothers anime.
Yeah.
Actually, the first video game movie to have come into existence. And yeah, Jeremy and I talk all about that and go over how absolutely insane it is, because it's it's pretty crazy. Like it's only 65 minutes long, and it feels like an eternity.
Oh gosh. All right. I'll have to watch the anime before I listen to that, but definitely Jack highly recommends watching this anime just for the absurdity of it. So all right. I think that's it.
I think we're done.
Okay. Until next time, everybody. We'll see you all on the flippity dippity.
Do-da day.